pronunciation of the title is actually somewhat controversial, I've discovered, because there are all different ways of spelling and approximating and adapting in Spanish all these baseball terms from English. And I'm sure that in some of the stories that I read, and in some countries, they say Ampaya with an accent over the A to make the pronunciation match the English. But in Cuba, they mostly say Ampaya, and so I've already gotten like criticism. It's spelled wrong, etc. Are we more of a fiction crowd, a baseball history crowd? Some of each?
Some of each.
Okay, well, I'll start by reading a little of the introduction and a little of the baseball history. And then I think I'll start with part of one story from the Dominican Republic. I often read whole stories, but that limits me to the short ones, and therefore some authors have gotten short shrift, so I'll read some parts of stories. Okay, so this is from the historical introduction. Everybody in the back can hear me? I'm sitting in the Estadio Latinoamericano in Havana during the championship round of the Cuban baseball season in the spring of 1992. One of the grandstand orators, so typical of Caribbean baseball crowds, is holding forth so our entire section can hear him on topics like who ought to be selected for that year's national team, why the manager should have called for a hit and run, who wasn't in position to take a cutoff throw, as well as asides about daily life in that moment of Cuban history. The comment I'll never forget, though, is not one of the opinions, but the punchline. Y eso lo sabe hasta un chileno, que no sepa dónde está la primera base. And anybody knows that, even a Chilean who doesn't know where to find first base. This has stuck in my mind because it was one of my first indications of how much, not just for Cuba, but for all the países peloteros, all the Spanish-speaking nations of the Caribbean Rim that are baseball-playing countries, the sport of pitcher and catcher, diamond and outfield, fielder and base runner, is perceived as an integral part of their cultures, a piece of what makes their people who they are. Whatever they share with that far-off Chilean, baseball, which they don't play in Chile, right, is a part of what makes them distinct. The fact that their national sport happens to have evolved in the northern neighbor is almost an afterthought. I doubt that it was in the mind of that grandstand orator in 1992 at all. Though the word baseball was imported along with the game, in common speech in Cuba and the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico, the game is always la pelota, which is simply the Spanish word for ball. Yet the game's origin matters too. Baseball has a place in the complicated love-hate relationships, power dynamics, understandings and misunderstandings between those south of our border and ourselves. And that's another piece of what set me off on the mission of collecting and translating the stories that follow. Paradoxically, the favorite major league team of many fans and writers, regardless of how many times they may have felt or chanted Yankee go home, is often the one based in the Bronx. In these stories, you'll find Yankee Stadium itself, Casey Stengel's ghost on a stifling Nicaraguan night, and cameo appearances by other pinstripe legends too. You'll also find bets on a game in a Santo Domingo bar, a game between the Cardinals and the Braves, placed in a Santo Domingo bar, and signings of Venezuelan would-be major leaguers by the White Sox and the Astros. You'll find some of the many and creative ways in which Caribbean Room Spanish has adopted and adapted the English vocabulary of the game. My favorites being out, A-U-T, and ao, A-O, for what happens when a runner is tagged with the ball. Ponchado, which could mean either punched out or given a flat tire or various other things, for the state of the batter after 3 whiffs. Roletazo for a ground ball, and quadrangular, as well as home run or home run for a four-bagger. And not surprisingly, U.S. military interventions figure in 2 stories, once as part of the many-layered baseball origin myth, and once an ironic counterpoint to the hero's love of the game. Then I go on to describe some of the stories, but I will skip that and move on to some of the history. first baseball games in the Spanish-speaking world took place in Cuba in the mid-1860s. This hat, which I bought in Havana, says baseball, since in English, 1868, or 1868, Cuba. The first baseball games in the Spanish-speaking world took place in Cuba in the mid-1860s, 2 decades after the game had evolved out of British and American predecessors, such as rounders and one-on-cat, in the environs of New York City, and at approximately the same time as Union soldiers from that metropolis were popularizing the New York game throughout the United States during the Civil War. The sport came to Cuba primarily with middle and upper class Cubans returning from study at Catholic colleges in the United States, and perhaps also via the crews of U.S. merchant and naval ships. Its rapid spread throughout the island was due in part to the fact that the new sport arrived just as long simmering sentiments against both Spanish colonialism and slavery were erupting into open rebellion, sparking the 10 Years' War of 1868-1878, which pitted an uneasy coalition of Cuban planters, other white Cubans of all classes, free people of color, and escaped slaves against the Spanish Imperial Army. Both then and in the decades to follow, Cubans latched onto baseball as a modern, democratic, healthy, sportsmanlike, and distinctly non-Spanish entertainment, one that baseball's boosters explicitly contrasted to the bullfight, which they condemned as old-world, old-fashioned, bloodthirsty, hierarchical, and unfair. The sport soon spread throughout the island among people of all classes and origins. Professional teams were founded in the cities of Havana and Matanzas, and makeshift teams and clubs flourished from docks to sugar mills, while publications such as El Pitcher and El Baseball covered and promoted the game. Spanish authorities tried on a few occasions to ban baseball completely, but in vain. By the 1890s, a visiting Spanish poet reported that, quote, everyone was at baseball, men and women, old and young, masters and servants. I had a presentiment that Spain had died for Cuba. When the final Cuban War for Independence broke out, 1895 to 98, Spanish authorities again instituted a ban, and this time professional ball players were among those who flocked to join the rebellion. 3 members of the pitching staff of the Almendares Azules, Blues, later known as the Alacranes or Scorpions, became rebel army officers, as did players from the other clubs. Emilio Saborin, player-manager of the rival Havana club and one of the organizers of the first professional league, was arrested for his pro-independence activities and exiled to a prison camp in Spanish Morocco, where he died. Thus, by the time U.S. troops intervened in the Cuban-Spanish conflict in 1898, baseball was already firmly established in Cuba as a national pastime, however North American in its pedigree. U.S. troops landed as part of what was, from the northern perspective, the Spanish-American War, which resulted in Spain's cession of what was left of its historic empire, Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and Guam, to the United States. When the Yankee troops ended their occupation of Cuba in 1902, the Platt Amendment, which inserted a perpetual U.S. right of intervention into the new Cuban Constitution, was seen as an imposition they left behind, but La Pelota was not. The Cuban struggle for independence also proved to be the main source of the sport's introduction to neighboring countries and peoples. From the 1860s to the 1890s, tens of thousands of Cubans left the island to escape Spanish political repression or the economic devastation resulting from the independence wars. Some settled in Tampa or New York, others in Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, and the Atlantic coast of Mexico and Venezuela. As veteran Venezuelan sports writer Juan Benet has put it, Cuba was, quote, the cradle of those who played the major role in introducing baseball to the rest of our countries. That Cuban blend of indigenous Tainos with Spaniards and African blacks living 90 miles of Caribbean waters off the coast of Florida, those cheerful and talkative Caribbeans, extroverted and immigrant as people who were born and grown up on islands tend to be, close quote. Sugar planters or sugar mill mechanics, doctors or dock workers, students of professions or professional shortstops, they brought baseball knowledge, equipment, and especially enthusiasm enthusiasm to the cane fields surrounding San Pedro de Macorís and the streets of Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic. San Pedro de Macorís being still the cradle of Major League Baseball players from Sammy Sosa to two Sorianos and any number of others. To the Yucatan Peninsula and the port of Veracruz in Mexico, and to Venezuela and Puerto Rico as well. Then I go on to describe how Cubans brought baseball to all of those countries, and then a couple of examples where it was a direct export from the U.S., one of which being Nicaragua, where a New York lumber exporter exported lumber from Nicaragua to the U.S. on the Atlantic coast, brought balls and bats and set up a team in the west coast of Mexico, where it was probably brought by U.S. naval ships and merchant ships. Okay, let me read a little. So it's been in the cultures of all these countries since in Cuba since the 1860s, and in the others since sometime between then and the turn of the 20th century. There's not actually a tradition of baseball novels in Latin America, unlike here. And if anyone's curious, I can talk about my theories about that later. What there is more is that various writers who happen to be baseball fans, or in a few cases who are not baseball fans but are trying to understand why everyone else is, have written, the occasional story about it. And there's also been some contests and stuff which I can talk more about if you're curious. I'm going to read the beginning of a story from the Dominican Republic that was one of the two most difficult in the whole collection to translate, which I'm also happy to answer questions about later, and the most fun to translate. And it's written by a Dominican writer who's primarily a poet named Alexis Gomez Rosa, and for the ex-UMass Boston faculty in the crowd, who was a student at UMass Boston for a year and a half in the mid-70s, I believe. Then he decided New York was more to his liking and spent many years there and eventually returned to the DR. So here's the little bio. Alexis Gomez Rosa, born 1950, is the author of such emblematic works of contemporary Latin American poetry as Adagio Cornuto and La Troika de los Mamíferos. He has published more than 15 books of poetry, winning the poetry prizes of various poetry prizes. He has been a pioneer in bringing together Eastern and Western influences in the Dominican Republic, both through his 1977 exhibit of pattern poetry in the Casa de Teatro and his 1985 book, High Quality Limited, which made use of the Japanese haiku and tanka forms. This story recounts about 40 years of Dominican history through the life, starting in the 50s, through the life of a radio announcer who, as you'll see, got his start pretending to announce baseball games in his backyard. And it begins with a quote from Jack Kerouac. Empty baseball field, a robin hops along the bench. Sorry, a haiku by Kerouac. You're the real thing, man. You made it. You've got $1 million voice. You're the archetype, the example of a pro behind the mic. Side by side in center field, the amazing Willie Mays. What a game, adjusting your intonation, just the right amount. On you go. The second game, 1962 World Series, Marichal on the mound. He delivers, strike one. 1-1 now on Roger Maris, evening the count. We were still in high school, the boys' normal school, caught between algebraic equations and depressing slogans of politics. Mama called you my precious, which was a sign of the protective shield she wove around you. But we were never jealous, because in truth, you were always the most vulnerable. Your nose running day in, day out, your body offering shelter to every cold and flu. That's why she rocked you in her arms, coddled you in her lap, called you precious, which made you grumble and pout, which only got you another batch of nicknames added to that. Being the last of the litter was both good and bad for you. You got butter on the bread, ice cream on a stick, popcorn in your pocket. But on the other hand, you were the first to get called out if you wandered off first base. Mama didn't like you tagging, Mama didn't like to see you getting soaked in the rain like the rest, much less tagging along with us chasing girls. These were difficult times for our elders, with their heads full of dreams and worries, and in our world too, things began to go downhill. The sweet turned sour for men and women and those who hoped to grow up into that state. Microphone in hand, you could mimic the best of them. You could make Buck Canal, that gaucho from Argentina, sound like the Dominican street, so that nobody stirred from their seat, because don't go away, this is just getting good. You could do Rafael Rubí, those magical swings of his narrative fad, a tomar sidra, mi hermano, ain't the beer cold. Special Mamita Special, a sizzling line drive to El Jardín Derecho, off the right field wall. How you could memorize so many baseball expressions and inflections, I don't know. But I do know how it happened, my man. All those years under Mama's thumb didn't go for nothing. Years when you had no better escape from solitude than the play-by-play over the radio, without the fits and starts and shocks imposed by female company, always on the make by scared of their own shadows, women who were like, if I met you before, I don't remember it, or like, I want to know if you mean business. Meeting business meant shelling out for a wish list that was as long as Mama's string of rosary beads. I mean it, my man. I'm offering serious counsel. So he goes on through his youth and interspersing it with history. You were a backcountry boy who didn't know that life is a stillbirth of passions that won't always lead to a pool of peaceful repose. Force X goes up against Force Y, tossing men onto battlefields, bleeding, mutilated in the name of fierce ideologies. And war broke out within the house. On one side, the certainties of the elders anchored in their religion, and on the other, you raised the demands of the needy and the banner of utopia. So there's a little flavor of what one writer does with baseball, which will come and go throughout the story, along with narrating the life of this character and 40 years of Dominican history. I'm now going to skip to a much more narrative Dominican story, which I'll read at least the first half of it. Then we'll do some questions, and then I could read the rest of that, or I could read some other ones. This story is by a young Dominican writer, a very interesting writer who writes mostly science fiction, but submitted this story to a contest for stories about baseball, named Daniel Ernesto Reyes Germán. And it begins with a popular saying, and a merengue correct. In translation, they say, the ant, this is on page 167 if you're reading along, the ant that grows wings is the one that goes astray, popular saying. I've got rhythm, I've got swing, I play ball like anything, is the merengue lyric. On its way from the capital to Los Llanos, the Maya Highway passes through a series of cane fields. When you reach signpost number who knows what, you can catch a glimpse of the town of San Luis. You can see the sugarcane railway, the oxen pulling their heavy loads, and the cane cutters with dark skin and brown sugar soles, machetes in hand, sharp blades in constant twisting motion, right to left, chopping at the green foliage that seems to glow and pant in the heat. You may feel you're breathing through a vat full of sugar, the best definition of a sweet smell. There, to the east of steamy Santo Domingo, is Josefina's house. She's having labor pains. Where's my pregnant lady? Asks a woman with a hint of a smile. She's directed to a bedroom. She's the midwife. Everyone calls her La Matrona. As fate will have it, the Señora Josefina Pierre gives birth to a girl. Josefina had her daughter the regular way, in her own home and without complications. But she was Catholic more by upbringing than by belief. That was enough to provide the child a name, Maria del Carmen Paul Pierre. Both parents were of Haitian descent. Every day, Maria del Carmen walked to the country schoolhouse carrying a cane leaf chair over her head. The chair was both her seat in the classroom and the weapon she wielded in the fights she got into, even at that age. She loved busting heads. Of course, she was sent home in the company of a teacher, but that did not get her punished. The neighbors said her parents spoiled her, overly supportive as they were. Maria del Carmen Paul Pierre was lively and smart. Her body was striking and exotic for her years. Black, tall, and thin, with a long, willowy spine, her kinky hair braided and tied with red ribbons. Her parents tried to hide her signs of masculinity, which disappeared anyway as she turned adolescent and adult. She exuded natural leadership. If you were a child her age, you both feared her and wanted to follow her. But in the environment in which she lived, her only outlet was to prance, tease, fight, and get into trouble, provoking complaints from teachers, relatives, friends, classmates, and neighbors. One fine day, the school sent a counselor to give Maria del Carmen's parents some advice. In the cramped parlor of their house, they waited expectantly for what he had to say. "The girl has a lot of energy. She's hyperactive," he said. "The best thing would be for her to take on some kind of activity or project, maybe some kind of sport, something to get all the bad stuff out of her head. You know what they say," the counselor added with the dispassionate calm of a psychologist, "an idle mind is the devil's workshop. She washes dishes and sometimes goes with me to the river to do the clothes," her mother offered without much hope. "That's not enough. She needs an activity that requires more energy, time, and effort. If I may say so, your daughter is very jumpy. It's almost as if she were trying to fly. That's the feeling I get, and nothing good can come of that." The teacher stood up, his lips seeming to offer a silent prayer that came from deep inside. "As my folks used to put it," he added, "the ant that grows wings is the one that goes astray." Those old sayings don't lie. What he recommended was a little league that held its games on the ball field at the edge of the village. He pointed that way with his chin, as if he were trying to plant a kiss on the wind. Unable to come up with any reason for delay, Josefina took Maria del Carmen by the arm and led her to the site that everyone called the play, which was baking under the unforgiving sun on a cloudless day. The arrival of the unlikely visitors awakened universal curiosity with the play. Throwing arms stopped in midair, bats did not swing, gloves did not reach out to catch balls in flight. One such ball raised a cloud of dust as it collided with the ground, craning their necks to the point of injury. Everyone stared at the pair of females who shyly stepped onto the green grass in search of the coach. "How do I sign her up?" Josefina blurted out, taking the bull by her horns. "First of all, ma'am, we take only boys. There isn't any girls league." A few boys laughed, though if Maria del Carmen were to find them outside the ball field, she would surely make them pay one by one. The coach shushed them. He was a tall, ordinary man, dressed no better than a scarecrow, with a dried-out face like a cashew nut. "It's doctor's orders," Josefina lied, irreverent and confident. "She needs to be here." The manager hesitated a moment and noted that Maria looked to be the right size to play third base, where he needed someone to round out his team. He picked up a notebook, gave the strange pair another once-over, and asked, "Does this whole piece of work have a name?" "She's Maria del Carmen Paul Pierre." The coach wrote this down and told her to run a few laps to warm up. He told her mother, "We'll give her a tryout to see if she's got what it takes." His tone was not lacking in innuendo. "When practice is over, we'll send her home to you." Maria del Carmen heard him and thought, "I'm no message to send and no soldier to give orders to." The manager handed her a bat and watched as she assumed her stance. "She's got something," he thought. He told his best pitcher to throw a fastball by her. Some more boys laughed, and she glanced at them just long enough to memorize their faces. Then she swung and made contact with the ball. It was a rolling, but well hit, so the manager said, "Okay, tomboy Maria, let's see you feel." And he spit, grinding the toe of his shoe over the saliva that turned the dirt to mud. From then on, she was not Maria del Carmen Paul Pierre. Everyone called her Tomboy Maria. When she got home that afternoon, all the neighborhood kids wanted to hear how she had done. Everyone knew about the morning's visit from the school and her being sent to join the league. She ducked inside just long enough to grab the necessities for stickball. The usual odds and ends of players took turns at bat and in the field. It wasn't long before the game expanded to include whole teams, and variations were added. Bases made of old license plates, home run derbies, and more. United by their fever for baseball, the children would play until the sun sank below the horizon. Then there's a little pause in the story. And there's a little pause for me to take a drink. Everything had better go right or I'm going to kick your asses. You're a bunch of lazy clowns, and if I have to tell anybody anything twice, you better be ready for what I do next. I'm not going all the way there to get shown up or to lose, especially on somebody else's turf. And another thing, get the money together. You know the price of the round trip, so don't play dumb like you never heard about it. We're leaving at 4 a.m. on the dot, American time. That's it, now get going, he muttered. I want to see you sweat. Except you, Tomboy Maria. I have something to discuss with you. Maria's heart skipped a beat, her pulse stopped. She didn't breathe. For a few seconds, she froze in fright. Coach, I'll bring the cash tomorrow when my father gets paid, she stammered, dropping her eyes and wringing her hands together, awakening the man's compassion. No, that's not it. He hesitated for a moment like a bearer of bad news. The thing is, you can't go. The league is for boys. You're not allowed. He spoke to her more courteously than usual, as if it really did hurt him to say this. Still, he didn't stray far from his usual brusqueness. I'm sorry, I really am. Tell that to Doña Josefina, so she'll know. Tomboy Maria nodded reluctantly. She climbed up on the bleachers and squatted there. All the anger she had bottled up to avoid causing problems in the league threatened to come pouring out. She remembered the moments when she was the idol of everyone watching in the play. Her eyes reddened and tears welled up in her chest when she got in fights at school. Although she felt humiliated, degraded, she couldn't show weakness. She thought she was the best player on the team, and she wasn't wrong. She remembered her recurrent dream of flying alongside a column of ants after a fierce downpour. The day she woke up in terror from the first of those dreams, her mother took her small head between her breasts and said, Joseph in the Bible dreamed of flying, and he ended up the leader of his people. The next time you dream this, concentrate on your goals. That's what she said more or less, though not in those exact words. Tomboy Maria decided that playing baseball was her greatest and most longed-for desire. When practice was over, all the boys headed for home. Tomboy Maria looked at the ones who had laughed at her when she first appeared. Now she had nothing to lose. The news that she couldn't go on the trip and show off all she had accomplished wounded the innermost corners of her soul. So what is it, she shouted, do I have shit on my face? Do I look like some kind of clown? She was going to give each of them what they deserved. But she controlled herself, began thinking about the consequences of her actions. It was more important to stay in the league than to break a few heads and give the boys the thrashing they deserved. She held on to the vague hope of coming back from a championship series someday with the gold medals she had imagined during stifling sleepless nights. She turned around and headed home, leaving the boys shocked at the gestures she made for them to remember her by. She loved baseball more than she loved busting heads. Though it was hard for her to believe sometimes, she felt so good simply because she could run faster, swing harder, steal more bases, and catch with more precision than the rest. A sense of superiority was what her soul needed the most. Still, Tomboy Maria could not hide her sadness when she got home. She came in with her head hanging. Her mother had been waiting for something like this to happen. It was to be expected. But she asked, putting down the broom, what's going on? They won't let me go play in a game between provinces because I'm a girl, Maria said between sobs. Don't worry, baby. I'll go talk with the coach. Josefina sat her daughter down in the rocking chair and told her not to move from the spot, that she'd be back soon. She went out the door with a determined air and disappeared among the curves of the road. You can't do anything for your daughter, the coach said. It makes me feel bad too. She's a good player, but she's a girl. Anyway, we can get by without her. That annoyed Josefina all the more. "My daughter's the best player," she said with swelling anger. "Why don't you pick out your best boy player? And this afternoon we'll pit them against each other so you can see." Josefina had a dark kerchief tied around her head, hiding the gray of her hair. She wore a cream-colored house dress, immaculately clean. On her feet were a pair of yellow samurai sandals, dry and cracked. This challenge would show that she was right. The coach accepted, but first he warned he won't win her permission to go on the trip. He punctuated the statement with a jab of his index finger, trying to hold his own. "And it will give her back her dignity," Josefina whispered into the air, while turning her back to hide her impotence. She remained proud of her determination. Let me stop that one there. If we have time, we could come back to it if you want. Are there questions? Hi.
Does she get into the league?
Yes.
She doesn't get to play in the championship, but she does continue to play in the league. And then the story takes us into what happens later in her life and her ambitions for her son to be a Major League ball player, which is another of the main themes of a lot of these stories, is a desire to sign with the Major League club.
Okay.
You're welcome. Other questions about anything? Or should I keep reading stories? Read more? Should I keep going with that one, or should I read you something else? It gets sad.
Yeah.
Hours later, Tomboy Maria was drawing a pair of wings on her shoulder. This, from her point of view, conferred even more talent on her arms, so she could swing harder and fulfill her dreams. "Those who believe in you, Lord, will never be ashamed. Amen." And she headed for the challenge, fulfilling her duty. In spite of her great accomplishments as a player, Tomboy Maria never found a place in her town or her society. The years went by, doing what they do, inscribing lines on her face, and even more so, putting her physical attributes on display, turning her into a blossoming teenage girl. When she was 18, she met Miguel Louis, an elegant and well-mannered plowman whose strong biceps guided oxen through the endless fields of cane. He was tall and dark with flashing eyes. They fell deeply in love. They conceived a boy whom they named Miguel Angel Louis Paul. "He's going to be a ball player," said the new mother in a wisp of a voice, with tears in her eyes as she beheld the gasping baby in her lap. After a moment of complete silence, while the baby gathered breath to erupt into cries, Miguel said, "Maria, I have to go to the capital to find work." He said it baldly, without beating around the bush. She looked him in the eyes while she rocked and tried to calm the baby. It was obvious he was leaving for good. A man who flees from such situations is worthless and a coward, she thought. He was in debt even for the candles he lit to the Virgin and his prayers to the saints, which was to say that if indulgences were still for sale, he'd buy them with borrowed money. And if Jesus came back and found him in such a state, he would leave him to his tears here on earth. For extended periods, mother and baby had to live on meat that was on the edge of spoiling for lack of electricity. People called it fishing meat because of its unique and penetrating smell like that of a stinking sea. It took no great powers of analysis to see that Miguel Louis wasn't coming back. He was a weak-willed man, the neighbors told Maria del Carmen. But she received these comments with an unseeing and complacent smile. Miguel Louis did not want to live in such a degrading situation anymore. That was why he wasn't coming back. It has been argued that time does not exist, and that for lack of legs it can neither stand still nor run. So let's just say that Miguel Angel's age increased. Miguel Angel, the son of Tomboy Maria. And now he was no longer a child in diapers, but a strapping youth who helped his mother with the chores. He gathered wood for the fire and charcoal for the stove. He carried heavy sacks of provisions from a small plot of land to a small house. The village of San Luis, despite its backward condition, is only an hour from the capital by bus. So Maria del Carmen could travel to work in the city during the day. Later, after Tomboy Maria's death, a villager named Fernando would tell how he drove a national brewery truck there in the capital, and how he came to meet her at a certain place on the road, pointing vaguely with his fingers. "So I was driving, he said with some pride, and I was always horny as a young man. I stopped by the monument that's famous for these things, you know, to look for a social worker, you know, the girls that sold a good time. One day the pimp told me that since I was a special customer, he had something new to me. Into the passenger seat climbed the black girl who was something to write home about. I was hungover like you wouldn't believe. And anyway, it was pretty dark for recognizing faces, but she recognized me. "Fernando?" she asked, surprised. "If you say so," he answered, not understanding what this was about. When he turned on the light in the cabin of the truck, he saw a sorrowful face swollen with tears. Even in the dim light, he could tell she was ashamed. "Don't tell anybody, Fernando, I beg you." She said, "I'll do whatever you want." Shocked, he pulled some coins out of his pocket and gave it to her. "Go," he said. "Tell the pimp I chickened out. Tomorrow come by my place and I'll get you an honest job at the brewery." The next day she did. Fernando took her to the brewery and managed to get her a cleaning job. Weekends she worked extra hours, but later he discovered that she had met another trucker there, and she went with him for money, with him and others who would pay. When Fernando learned what she was doing, he advised her against this behavior. She told him she needed the money to send her son to Puerto Rico, where there were important big league representatives scouting the young players. When she finished washing Fernando's clothes, she said to him, "I live for my son now. We went through a lot together, and what I want for him now is to be what I could never be." She was not well. You could tell it from her yellowish eyes and darkened skin. Fernando advised her to go to the hospital for a checkup, but she wouldn't do it, not until later, when they discovered the illness that would take her life. "Mama, I need a pair of cleats. They lent me these so I could run faster and they work, but I want a pair of my own. And I need a metal bat for practicing on my own, and some yellow baseballs, an equipment bag, and a helmet." Miguel Angel went on asking for things as if he were reading a speech. Tomboy Maria's head was spinning. A dull internal throbbing punctuated her thoughts. She was getting weaker every day with less strength to go on. But she had to be there for her son, to see him fulfill his dreams, and those she'd been unable to achieve as a child. She had gotten together the money for his travel and accommodation in Puerto Rico, where the best contracts could be signed. This was Miguel Angel and Tomboy Maria's dream. They couldn't wait for the day to arrive. "Don't worry, Mama, I'm going to shine. I'm going to do it. I'm going to stand out, to fly the way you used to do. Your efforts won't be in vain. Look," and he lifted up his t-shirt, showing his bare chest. "I had 2 wings tattooed in your name, Mama. Look at it. The guy in the grocery store did it in honor of you. When I come back here signed with all those dollars, I'll pay you back for everything you've done for me." When he didn't get the response he expected, he quickly pulled the shirt down again. "Son, all I want is to see you alive and healthy. If God grants that I get to see you signed, I won't complain." They both smiled, neither meeting the other's eyes. She set the table and he spoke with feeling, as if savoring that moment. Tomboy Maria was lying, but her son didn't believe her anyway. Everyone in the neighborhood knew that she'd give her life to see her son signed. Word of his trial circulated after she read it slip to one of the truckers. Everybody knew what was afoot. Amid all the sacrifices she was compelled to make, Maria remembered the old saying that life was lived by fire and blood, and she understood. Miguel Angel went to Puerto Rico and came back with a contract, but he had to give the news to his mother in the morgue. He died from a venereal disease caught from one of the truckers. They say that he did what she had done when she wasn't allowed to go and play in the interprovincial game, that he painted wings on his bat and prayed. They say that when he saw his mother in the coffin, he told her the story as if she could hear it. He sat next to the corpse, sitting and swaying, like a man under a spell, and he repeated, "Mama grew wings, she grew wings." In the stadium, the charged voice spoke into the microphone. "On the mound is the much-feared pitcher of the Puerto Rican team, Carlos Ortiz, while at the plate, hitting for the Dominicans, is Miguel Luis Paul. And here it comes," the Puerto Rican announcer said. "Blew it by him. Fastball, strike called. The crowd is going crazy." Miguel Luis touched his chest and then stretched his arm out straight, pointing into the distance. "That's an unspoken threat," the Dominican announcer announcer said, Miguel Luis, alias El Chu, has the most stratospheric average of the team. It was a tense moment, and the announcer barely had time to finish his sentence before he cried out, "Will you look at that? It's going, 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 gone. The ball took wings and flew." As he ran, he could make out words in the exclamation of the human wave in the stands. He took his time, touching the bases, crossing himself, and looking toward the sky. He acknowledged his fans with 2 fingers, touching them to his lips, to his chest, and then toward the crowd. The Dominican flag waved from right to left, and tears could be seen from afar in the eyes of his countrymen. Triumphal pride felt in every heart. Moments before, in the dugout, his manager had heard him reciting, "The ball that grows wings is the one that goes astray." He repeated it maniacally to himself. And then the loudspeakers announced, "Now batting," keeps flashing back, "now batting for the Dominican team, Miguel Luis Paul," and the crowd screamed. So that's the story of that story and the other Dominican story, is that there actually was pretty much no baseball literature in the Dominican Republic. And it's often said that the 2 passions of the country are la pelota and la política, baseball and politics, and all the literature is about politics. And so the Dominican Secretariat of Culture, and the now Ministry of Culture, the government cultural department, they decided to have a contest to rectify the situation. So they had a contest with serious prize money for stories about baseball. And so many well-known Dominican writers like Gomez Rosa, who was a very prominent poet, or emerging writers like Daniel Reyes-Herman entered, and they published a volume of the winners and the honorable mentions, which was called Home Run 600 in honor of Sammy Sosa's 600th home run. And then they did it again the next year, and they eventually published another book of the winners and mentions, which was called Círculo de Espera, One Deck Circle. And that's why so I was able to get these, and there were some great stories in them. There have probably been some since, but basically, anybody who tells you the free market will resolve the problems of literature, here's an opposite example. Questions? Yeah.
How old was she in the beginning?
Well, we see her when she's born, but how old was she when she went the first time? To try, let's see if it says. Oh, I think about that.
Those are the questions I would have.
It may be that we don't know the answer and we have to ask the author, but let's see what he says. It just says, "One fine day, the school sent a counselor." So she's just started school, so I bet she's like 1st grade or something like that.
First, second, or 8. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
Did Miguel's name change? Was Miguel Angel, and then it was Miguel Luis when he said like that?
What was it at first? Miguel Angel is so sometimes people are called by their first and middle name, like Mayruth or Miguel Angel, but his surname is Luis.
Oh,
He has
okay.
2, and they also in Spanish-speaking countries have 2 surnames, their father's name and their mother's name. So he's Miguel Angel Luis Paul Pierre. There's several generations.
Okay.
Yes.
So how'd you come to write this book? Were you always into baseball?
I've always been a baseball fan, and I feel like when I was in 1st and 2nd and 3rd and 4th and 5th grade, most of what I read was either baseball biographies of frontiersmen and Indians, and also books of baseball story, fiction, baseball for kids, and baseball anecdotes. And so it's always been there in my notion of what reading is, and box scores. And then later I was a writer of fiction and nonfiction and a literary translator, and I was in Havana in 2014 at the Havana Book Fair. And I stumbled on this book of a Cuban anthology of baseball stories written by Cuban writers. And I'm always kind of on the lookout for things that I might want to translate, and the questions always are, will this be fun or interesting or challenging? And is there a ghost of a chance that an American publisher might publish it in English? And I thought, a book of Cuban baseball stories is probably too narrow, but I wonder what's out there, you know, from other countries. So I kind of first picked out the 5 or 6 stories I liked best from the Cuban one, and then gradually I went looking around to say, I found these Dominican anthologies, and I asked Cuban writers that I knew, you know, what do you know about baseball stories elsewhere, and one person sent me to another, and I did a lot of messing around with the internet databases, and eventually came up with about 60 stories to choose from, including the maybe 20 Cuban ones. And what I ended up with were 5 Cuban ones, 5 from the Dominican Republic, 3 from Puerto Rico, 3 from Venezuela, 1 each from Nicaragua and Mexico. The one from Mexico is actually a one-act play. There was one other from Mexico I wanted to use, but the author had died and I couldn't get permission from the literary agent for his estate. But that was the only one that I had trouble with the permissions for, which is a pretty good average as these things go. And I tried to balance, so that's sort of in line with the strength of the sport in those countries and the literature. And also I tried to balance them by theme. So the kind of recurrent themes tend to be making it in the major leagues is one, sex and gender and relationships, particularly in the stories by the 3 female writers, but also others. Gambling on baseball, which is very prevalent in all of these countries. History and politics. There's probably some others. But so I tried to balance it. So supernatural interventions and magic and stuff, of which there's a lot. Yeah. Phyllis.
It was going to be a question about permission for now. Are there stories that deal with the relationship with this country?
Yeah, particularly the Dominican stories. 2 of the Dominican stories. So there's a story called, well, the one I started reading, The Real Thing, ends up dealing with the U.S. intervention in '65 and also with immigration to the U.S., so both sides of that relationship. There's a Dominican story called The Strange Game of the Men in Blue, which is the other hardest one to translate, because it's extremely baroque in its language. And that is about, in an unnamed island country, the first game of baseball played, which is played in what appears to be the 19th century, staged by a U.S. admiral who's leading an occupation force that's trying to fight a guerrilla rebellion, but he also recruits local people to play. So it's very complex, and it has nothing to do with the history of baseball in the Dominican Republic or anywhere else, really. No, really not. But it's an invented origin myth that is a lot about the complicated relationship with the U.S. and with baseball. Those are the main 2 that deal with relations with the U.S. other than the making it in the major leagues. And the immigration of ball players. Yeah.
Did you ever play Little League One for?
For 2 years. I played more like pickup softball than Little League. Yes.
This is out of left field.
So we hope.
Is there any the issue of the political economy of corporatization, the sports industries? I'm from Miami and follow the Marlins in that debacle,
right,
of how the citizens are paying. You know, and these big owners are just making all this money gambling on it. And now the Bushes, all these people are involved with it. So I'm just wondering if kind of the idea of the commons, there's any way in which the way in which everyday people who create the wealth, essentially,
No, I don't think so. Even in any of the stories that I read, because the stories are not about U.S. ball. They're really about Latin American ball, or about this dream, or about following the U.S. games on the radio, where they're kind of legends. Like there's this one where Casey Stengel's ghost appears to a young kid in Nicaragua before the Sandinista Revolution, and tells him he's going to be a baseball player. So the U.S. figures much more as this kind of legendary major league place, or baseball, like I said, is a counterpoint to, or a symbol of, or something, the political relationships. But about the business of the game, no, and I think that's because although there's some big business of the game in the Latin American leagues, it's much less so. There is a story from a Venezuelan writer called Big League, which is about several generations trying to make it in the big leagues, and how they don't, and in a sense how they're used. But it's more really a criticism of why is it that the only way to be a success in Venezuela is to make it in the U.S. major leagues. It's more the political theme of that story. Yeah.
Do Venezuelans only read Venezuelan short stories like this, and Dominicans, or do they read each other's stories, across the countries?
No, I don't really know. I would say probably mostly each other's, because it's like there isn't in Cuba, as of yet, a book like that that's a multinational anthology, and similarly in the other countries. There are anthologies. There's one Mexican anthology that by extension includes one of the Sergio Ramirez Nicaraguan stories. Sergio Ramirez, prominent Nicaraguan writer, former vice president, has written like 6 stories about baseball, which is more than anyone else that I know of. And they included that in the Mexican anthology, but the anthologies at least are very national. They also include at least as much poetry and commentary as they do fiction. And poetry, baseball is also very important, more so than here, in the poetry of these countries. But as far as I know, probably not. No, because when I asked Cubans about stories from other countries, I was told about one famous Colombian story, didn't end up including, and no, it was mostly ask so-and-so in Puerto Rico, maybe he knows. So I think the answer was probably no.
So they don't have this equivalent of the big leagues or the big money, but so they support their families, they have a status there?
So this has changed a lot over the years. So they used to have, yes, their own leagues, and they do still have their own leagues, and people fiercely follow the rivalries of their own leagues and their own teams, like the Tucson and Domingo teams, and this city in Venezuela has a rivalry with that city in Venezuela that's as strong as the Red Sox and the Yankees. And they, yeah, if you're a pro, you did, and to some extent still do, make enough to support your family, and also they would often play, it's sort of like free agency. They would, so a Dominican ball player might go play in Mexico if they got offered more money by a Mexican team. Or one country had a summer league and one country had a winter league. So they do both. And they barnstormed in the US. And so the height of sort of independent professional baseball was before the 50s probably. Then, because most of them couldn't play in the US major leagues because they weren't white. They weren't viewed as white. And so after the color bar came down and darker skinned Latin American players could play in the US major leagues, gradually, over a period between then and now, some of the talent went directly into that pipeline. Like that's true in the Dominican, right, where all these major league teams now have these training camps and everything. So it's somewhat probably reduced the quality of the professional teams there, but there still are professional teams there which are maybe made up of the people who don't quite make it in U.S. ball or who choose not to. So there is still professional ball, but they don't make anything like the astronomical salaries that are made here. And except Cuba, which is a whole different situation. Yeah.
You said something about the sort of the language of baseball. It's really, I felt that there were three languages in play, Spanish, English, and baseball. And I realized that I'm kind of like a passive understander of this baseball lingo, but I couldn't have done what you did. And you are fluent in this language, and just thinking about that.
Okay, well,
Listen.
I discussed that in the introduction, so I can read what I say about it. And I can maybe say a little more. A challenging and enjoyable part of the translation process has been capturing some of the flavor of Latin American baseball terminology. In the original Spanish, the writers adopt a wide variety of ways of spelling English-derived baseball terms, sometimes using English spelling, sometimes italicized, sometimes not. Or sometimes using the Spanish spellings that best approximate the way the word is locally pronounced. Thus, dogao, D-O-G-A-O, is the best approximation of dugout, because the spelling D-U-G-O-U-T in Spanish would be pronounced something like dugo, except that final T's are rare, dugo. On the other hand, catcher, Q-U-E-T-C-H-E-R, and fly, F-L-A-I, render the English sounds pretty well. And J-I-T, hit, doesn't do so exactly, because the J sounds like the German or Hebrew CH, right? Hit. But it's better than a silent H would be, because then the word would be it. So, in general, those words are pronounced as close as possible to the English, but with the effects of the local accents and spellings. But the writers, so on the other hand, a writer's use of hit or catcher in the English spelling communicates something else, which is a character or narrator's knowledge of English, or the writer's interest in reproducing it verbatim, because they're trying to show that knowledge or that capture that flavor or rise to that register. Still another part of the flavor comes from the inventions that have renamed baseball concepts purely in Spanish. Examples include jardinero, which means gardener, or someone standing in like a field, or lawn, so that's an outfielder. Quadrangular, four-angled, and thus four-sided, which is, as I said before, an alternate word for home run besides the English-derived ones. Emergente, which is someone who emerges or puts in an appearance. Can anybody guess or know what an emergente is? Yes. Or imparable, unstoppable, as an alternative to hit, to say it purely in Spanish. So the writers use all these different things. And what I decided, after a lot of discussion with my literary translators group about this issue, I think was to kind of scatter those different things throughout the stories, not trying to do it one-to-one at all, but capturing the kind of use that that writer was making of the thing, so that overall you get this flavor and you remember that although this is baseball, it's Latin baseball, but not to overwhelm the reader with a million italicized things.
Sorry. I already asked one.
So, over how many years spans the first story's publication to the last stories?
Leaving one out, it's 1989 to 2010 or something like that. And that was kind of my plan. But when I got leads to people to talk to in Venezuela and even out of Venezuela, they said, you've got to include this classic Venezuelan story, which is called something about Mamporal, which is called La Gloria de Mamporal, the Glory of Mamporal, by a writer named Andrés Eloy Blanco. Andrés Eloy Blanco was a politician, writer, orator, essayist of this sort that are very common in Latin America, in Venezuela, in the teens, 20s, 30s, 40s, so was various times, cabinet minister, a political prisoner, writer, in exile, everything in between. He wrote a very famous poem in Venezuela about the Venezuelan victory over Cuba in the 1940s, the 1940 Latin American World Series, which was the only event that they had. So he wrote this story called The Glory of Ampaya, which is kind of a satire of Venezuelan rural society, or using rural society to satirize Venezuelan urban society, or the different interpretations, but it's about a rivalry between these two little towns and a climactic baseball game that happens between them, and a big argument and a fight and all this. So I said, and it was made into a movie in Venezuela in the 90s, and it's still everybody, so I included that one because I couldn't leave it out.
I wonder if they're all mostly what you might call triumphalist. And partly I'm thinking about the fact that in this country, there's this problem that lots and lots of kids have these fantasies that they're going to be great athletes, and they then don't make it. And that's a problem. So I wonder about that.
Right. So the ones that deal with that theme, no. So would you call the Maria Macho, the Tomboy Maria Macho? It has a little, I mean, the guy does sign, but there's a lot of tragedy. And so that's sort of in the middle. There are, in all the stories that I read, and this theme was most prominent, in the Dominican stories, there were some of each. There were some that were very triumphalist, and the person uses trickery. There's one about this kid who cons Sammy Sosa into signing a ball for him by pretending he's very sick, and then he survives and he goes on to become a ball player. So there's that kind of wishful stuff. But there are others about people who don't make it. And the Venezuelan representative in here, which is true of pretty much all of, the way I found some of the Venezuelan stories, other than the Glory of Ampaya, was that doodling around on the internet, I somehow stumbled on a master's thesis that somebody wrote in Venezuela about the theme of the American dream as represented in stories about trying to make it in baseball. And that's how I found this one among others. This one called Big League by a writer named Salvador Tejan, which is about how a series of generations of a family fail in this dream. Why did we try to have this, why stadium rather than school and stuff like that. So I would say there are some of each.
So the title of your book?
The title of the book is that I wanted something that would convey it was about baseball and had a baseball colloquial flavor, but had some Latin flavor too. So really, I thought of about 4 or 5 different, baseball things that people yell at baseball games.
So nobody yells it out in one of the games, in one of the stories?
No. I couldn't find anything that happened in one of the stories that really made for a good title. So I thought, let me choose a bunch of things people might yell at games and think about one that I could Latinize. I can't remember what the other alternatives were, but that was the one I ended up with. Alan?
I feel that in the United States, you could say that baseball's golden age has passed. Is that true down here?
It's true in Mexico. It's not true in the other baseball playing countries. Soccer has definitely overtaken. Well, in Mexico, it was always sort of a regional sport. If you want me to read more history, I could read a little part about baseball as the socialist sport of the Yucatan during the Mexican Revolution. So it was always mostly Yucatan, Veracruz on the East Coast and the West Coast, but not that much in the interior. Mexico City, of course, had a team, but those were. And there was, the height of Mexican baseball was in the 40s when a Mexican millionaire tried to establish a Mexican league that would recruit U.S. players and would rival the U.S. major leagues and black and white players, and that's described in the intro, and there are whole books about it. But when that failed, baseball in Mexico began to decline, and then there was a revival when Fernando Valenzuela pitched for the Dodgers in the 80s, and that year Lincoln, but it's been much surpassed by soccer, but not in any of the other countries as of yet, I would say. And then there are arguments about whether it's really been surpassed. Sports writers will engage in debates. Yeah, but total attendance and total capitalization and blah, blah, blah. Should I read about the Yucatan? Or should I read another story? Question?
Could you just say a little bit more how you got from the 60 to the 18 stories, and also how you selected the order of the stories in the book?
Yeah, well, how I got from 60 to the 18 was mostly, I kind of went through them all in terms of how much I liked them, which I could refer to as their literary quality, but what does that really mean other than how much I like them? So I kind of did yes, no, maybe.
But, well, other than what you already spoke to, that you were getting some balance in
Right.
the
So the first step
Right,
was
so that's
kind of
understood,
yes,
yeah.
no, maybe according to how good I thought they were in stories, how involving, how skilled, how whatever. And I also wanted a range, since the stories did have a big range of styles, from the very literary to the very straightforward, I wanted that. I wanted as many female authors as possible, which was that there was one other.
How many of the 60 were women?
4.
And 3
Oh,
men?
the 16, 3. Of the 60, I think 4. I think there was one other woman who had an honorable mention in the Dominican, 2 years of Dominican contests. And Sandra Tavares, who's in here, had 2. She had an honorable mention.
So of the 60, there were only 4.
So in the 60, there were 5 stories, 4 female authors.
Oh, 5 stories, 4. And 3 made it into the 18.
3 made it in. One of them I just didn't think was that good, much as I would have liked to have had 4 women. And then after that, after having pretty much sort of, okay, these are yeses or maybes in terms of quality, then I kind of did the other things about the balance of the country.
So, in 3 years, when this has gone through multiple trainings, there's a clamor for a second volume. Is there enough more stories to make it worthwhile?
I'm pretty happy with this one. I think these were really, no, it's not like, there was one other criteria, which is there were some stories that I thought were really good, but they were too embedded in local culture and illusion to make them understandable.
Right.
So the one I said was most difficult was The Real Thing, and at that one, the one by Alexis Gomez Rosa, and for that one I do provide a paragraph of rapid summary of the Dominican history that it refers to, but I know that that's not right, really help unless you keep looking back at it. So that was another reason. So no, I kind of think this is the cream of the crop, unless they're new ones. Yeah.
What about compiling a Spanish version international one to be published down there for the...
If some Spanish publisher came to me and said, I would like to do that, I would, there would sort of be the question of why me, in a way. They don't need to be translated, and they might be, a different introduction would probably be more appropriate. So I really feel like somebody else should do it, not me. If there had been a US publisher that wanted to do a bilingual edition, wanted to do 2 editions, one for Spanish-speaking readers in the US and one for English readers, that would have been great. But so far, that has not. If you know somebody at like Spanish language random house, tell them.
And this is sort of a specific question, but about following up on the publishing. I had the impression that most of these, if not all of the stories, had been published before, but in your credits, there's only one attribution to a prior publication, the rest are by permission by authors. It's near the wall. And I was wondering why, like, just from a publishing thing, like why the original publications of these stories don't need to be listed here.
They don't need to be listed. I guess I could have done it. Sometimes if the authors had requested it, I would have done it. And sometimes you see.
Oh no, I thought it was one of the things like you had to. Like,
you only have, it depends who owns the copyright. So if the copyright belongs to the author.
Oh right, so the copyright belongs to the author and they give their permission.
And they give permission, then you don't have to. So the only one where I had to get permission from the publisher was
the wall.
Was the wall, because Leonardo Padura kind of uniquely lets his Spanish publisher serve essentially as his agent. So they represent everything of his, whether they've actually published it or not. I think they finally published that story in a book of his stories, but it had first appeared, I don't know where, I think it may have been unpublished when it was published. I'm not sure.
I thought that was really excellent.
Yeah, I didn't read that one because it's a little slow to read out loud. And so Leonardo Padura is probably the most well-known author in the collection. He's a Cuban writer who became famous for a series of detective novels, which are now a Netflix series called The Four Seasons. And then in this country, for a book that was translated into English called The Man Who Loved Dogs, which is a wonderful book. And this is an early, but Padura was a great baseball fan, and he was a sports writer before he was a fiction writer. And this is an early story of his, which is about a bureaucrat who's sitting in his office at board, and he looks outside and he sees this kid throwing a ball against the wall and catching it and throwing it and catching it like we all have done, or many of us have done to practice. And he remembers his own childhood dreams of being a ball player, and he goes out and talks to this kid, and that's what it's about. So it's neither triumphalist about baseball, but it's about baseball. It's about childhood dreams and what you leave behind when you grow up. Yeah.
The library actually closes at 8.
Oh, okay, then it's time to go on to the signing. Everything else you'll have to read yourself.